How did JD Vance use history and memory politically to bolster his keynote address? This is Kotow, and let's talk some politics. Using history or historical memory is not uncommon for political speech, including in American politics. Forming connections with history, or at least a perceived past, can invest a political speech as more than merely a rehash of policy, but as a construction of a powerful and convincing narrative. This narrative shows an understanding of the past to explain the present and chart the course to the future. Vance employed this rhetorical technique multiple times throughout his speech at the GOP convention. I'll take a look at each of the instances I detected its use, provide some background information on the references where appropriate, and attempt to discern what political value he may have sought to derive from their invocation.
And it is a reminder of the sacred duty we have to preserve the American experiment, to choose a new path for our children and grandchildren.
The first example is a quick reference to the concept of the American experiment. Viewing the United States' political system as something akin to an experiment, separate and untested compared to the governments of Europe, has been a common refrain stretching back to the nation's founding. For example, George Washington declared in his first inaugural address, "And since the preservation of the sacred fire of liberty and the destiny of the Republican model of government are justly considered as deeply, perhaps as finally staked, on the experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people." I think here Vance was simply using a common refrain for describing the American governing system as potentially fragile and need for continuous effort to keep it viable, adding to the theme that it must be maintained with vigilance as its purpose can be corrupted by what he describes as the ruling elite.
A career politician by the name of Joe Biden supported NAFTA, a bad trade deal that sent countless good jobs to Mexico. When I was a sophomore in high school, that same career politician named Joe Biden gave China a sweetheart trade deal that destroyed even more good American middle-class manufacturing jobs. When I was a senior in high school, that same Joe Biden supported the disastrous invasion of Iraq, and at each step of the way, in small towns like mine in Ohio or next door in Pennsylvania or Michigan, in states all across our country, jobs were sent overseas and our children were sent to war.
Next, Vance describes three sins that can be considered under the banner of globalism advanced from both sides of the political aisle, two economic and one foreign policy. The North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, was an agreement on lowering tariffs and trade barriers between the United States, Mexico, and Canada in the early 1990s. The second issue he brings up is the ascension of the People's Republic of China into the World Trade Organization in the early 2000s, further lowering trade barriers and tariffs. The Iraq invasion was launched in early 2003 under the Bush administration, ostensibly over threats of the Iraqi government potentially providing material support to Islamic terrorists, specifically through WMD, weapons of mass destruction, proliferation. Vance directly associates Joe Biden with all three, attributing blame to his opponent with failed policies of the past for which he and his audience suffered. However, it is worth noting that these policies enjoyed wide bipartisan support, and in fact, NAFTA ratification had more opposition from the Senate Democrats at the time, who voted 27 for it versus 28 against, compared to the GOP, 34 for and 10 against. The Iraq War similarly saw more opposition from the Democratic Party in the Senate, 29 for, 21 against, versus the GOP, 48 for, 1 against.
To that mammal, things worked out for me. After 9/11, I did what thousands of other young men my age did in that time of soaring patriotism and love of country. I enlisted in the United States Marines.
This reference to 9/11 recalls a time of national unity in the face of foreign aggression and call to duty in which Vance answered the call. Appeals to 9/11 invest his service as part of a noble defense on behalf of the nation worthy of admiration and respect. To be clear, I have no idea what reasons motivated Vance's service. Rather, this analysis is meant to discern the likely political purpose for its use in this speech. I take him at his word for his reason for joining, but that does not change how it functions as a political tool in the speech given. A quick aside, Vance did not join immediately after 9/11, but doing so would have been unlikely given his age. Born in August 1984, he would have been 17 at the time of 9/11. And while it would be technically possible to enlist with a parent's permission, it is reasonable to expect him to wait until after graduation to do so. In fact, he enlisted in the Marines in 2003, soon after he graduated. He was assigned as a public affairs specialist, and his 4-year period of service included a 6-month tour in Iraq.
Paid the price. For decades, that divide between the few with their power and comfort in Washington and the rest of us only widened. From Iraq to Afghanistan, from the financial crisis to the Great Recession, from open borders to stagnating wages, the people who govern this country have failed and failed again.
Here is a laundry list of what he terms failures for both Republicans and Democrats, particularly the Bush and Obama administrations. This appears to be an attempt to supplant the party divisions of the past and present his ticket's candidacy as divorced from these past failures, made more explicit by his next statement praising the Trump administration's record.
I heard some young family member observe that their parents' generation, the baby boomers, could afford to buy a home when they first entered the workforce. But I don't know, this person observed, if I'll ever be able to afford a home. The absurd cost of housing is the result of so many failures.
This reference to the baby boomers, Americans born between 1946 and 1964, and past prosperity associated with the American dream of home ownership appears to be a call to nostalgia. However, given its short nature and presented as a recalled anecdote rather than his own construction, I think this reference was just meant to be a nebulous, nostalgic appeal rather than any direct reference to a policy or even specific time period.
You know, one of the things that you hear people say sometimes is that America is an idea. And to be clear, America was indeed founded on brilliant ideas like the rule of law and religious liberty, things written into the fabric of our Constitution and our nation. But America is not just an idea. It is a group of people with a shared history and a common future. It is, in short, a nation. Now, it is part of that tradition, of course, that we welcome newcomers. But when we allow newcomers into our American family, we allow them on our terms. That's the way we preserve the continuity of this project from 250 years past to hopefully 250 years in the future. And let me illustrate this with a story, if I may. I'm, of course, married to the daughter of South Asian immigrants to this country. Incredible people. People who genuinely have enriched this country in so many ways. And, of course, I'm biased because I love my wife and her family, but it's true. Now, when I proposed to my wife, we were in law school, and I said, honey, I come with $120,000 worth of law school debt and a cemetery plot on a mountainside in eastern Kentucky. And I guess standing here tonight, it's just gotten weirder and weirder, honey. But that's what she was getting. Now, that cemetery plot in eastern Kentucky is near my family's ancestral home. And like a lot of people, we came from the mountains of Appalachia into the factories of Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Now, that's Kentucky coal country, one of the 10... Now, it's one of the 10 poorest counties in the entire United States of America. They are very hardworking people, and they're very good people. They're the kind of people who would give you the shirt off their back even if they can't afford enough to eat. And our media calls them privileged and looks down on them. But they love this country, not only because it's a good idea, but because in their bones they know that this is their home, and it will be their children's home, and they would die fighting to protect it. That is the source of America's greatness. As a United States Senator, I get to represent millions of people in the great state of Ohio with similar stories, and it is the great honor of my life. Now, in that cemetery, there are people who were born around the time of the Civil War. And if, as I hope, my wife and I are eventually laid to rest there, and our kids follow us, there will be 7 generations just in that small mountain cemetery plot in eastern Kentucky. 7 generations of people who have fought for this country, who have built this country, who have made things in this country, and who would fight and die to protect this country if they were asked to.
Vance spent a good amount of time on this philosophical point and benefited from the World War II veteran making a similar point early in the evening. In this case, America is defined by Vance as more than merely an idea or a philosophy. Rather, he defined America as a concept that is generational, inherited, and tied to the land itself. Vance traces his own participation in this inheritance to his family's presence in eastern Kentucky, with references to the region and the community he identifies with as far back as the Civil War. He locates a desire to defend this legacy as a primary motivation and strength for the United States. Ties to specific territory are often intrinsically linked to definitions of nationhood, although not always. Without going into a full diatribe on the concept of nationalism, I'm going to reference the historian Benedict who defines a nation as an imagined community, saying, "Imagined because the members of even the smallest nation will never know most of their fellow members, meet them, or even hear of them, yet in the minds of each lives the image of their communion." It appears that Vance was tying his position on illegal immigration to this appeal to defense and appreciation of a homeland. As part of his narrative construction, regardless of the hard times and poverty he, and by extension his intended audience, endured, they were participants in a unified and noble project stretching back and forward for generations. Again, using Anderson, finally, it is imagined as a community because, regardless of the actual inequity and exploitation that may prevail in each, the nation is always conceived as a deep horizontal comradeship. Ultimately, it is this fraternity that makes it possible, over the past 2 centuries, for so many millions of people not so much to kill as willing to die for such limited imaginings. What do you think? Did JD Vance give a good speech? And did you notice his uses of historical memory within it at the time? Do you think his usage benefited his speech? And what do you think of this kind of analysis? Was it worthwhile? And where do you disagree with where I came down on it? Let me know in the comments below. This is Kotel, and thanks for watching.